This is Talk to Seattle, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode, I have Heidi Stuber, who's running for Seattle City Council in the 4th District. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Jason.
Could you tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe your background and experience?
Sure. So I'm a businesswoman. I'm a mom to an autistic son. I've done a tremendous amount of advocacy in the education disability rights world. And I'm also a former teacher. So I started my career actually teaching environmental science in inner city Chicago. So I was thinking about climate change like way back in the gore years. And then when I moved to Washington, my teaching certificate didn't transfer. So I kind of fell into business first in the education world. And I was really good at business. And so I ended up getting my MBA at Seattle University and have been a business leader now for over a dozen years, kind of in alternative environments at first. So I've worked at Woodland Park Zoo, I worked at North Seattle College, and I'm running a vacation rental property management business now. But really, what I focus on is organizational change, which is figuring out a strategic plan so organizations can change for the better. And I got into this race because I think City of Seattle needs somebody that's kind of taking that big picture strategic approach and thinking about how to collaborate and where the city needs to be in 5, 10, and 20 years.
What made you want to run for this office in particular?
Well, I think it's this office because I really believe Seattle can change for the better. And I've been a part of this city for 16 years. I raised my son here. And, I see myself being here for the rest of my life. And when I look around, I see a beautiful, well-resourced city. We're a draw for people moving here all over the country and the world. And I just firmly believe we can do better than this. And I've been, interested in politics and involved in legislative advocacy a bit for years, but I really think we can have the biggest impact in our local communities. So I was really motivated to run for my local district office because I think we can have a more action-oriented response to homelessness. We can look at housing affordability. We can support our students and we can think about climate change. And I believe I can have the biggest impact right here in Seattle, in my district.
And could you tell me a little bit about your district?
Yeah, I feel really lucky to live in District 4. I've been here 7 years. I lived in Wallingford and now I live in Ravenna. And, it's a really beautiful district. We've got our great parks. I walk my dog in through the Ravenna Ravine all the time. We go to Magnuson, we go to Gasworks. And we're also really lucky as we have 3 light rail stations and the Burke-Gilman. So we have a lot of options for alternative transportation. And of course, I would be remiss not mentioning that we have, one of the best universities in the whole country, Go Dogs. And so I think we're a really beautiful and lucky district, but we're also a district that we have all these different neighborhoods and people that care deeply about their city, but we have some really different ideas about what the way forward is. So I think anybody thinking about District 4 and how to lead it has to be thinking about how to collaborate and bring people together with a shared vision.
And what are some of the biggest challenges facing your district?
Well, when I go and talk to my constituents, when I'm knocking on doors, they say all the things that we're thinking about at the city level, right? They're talking about homelessness. They're talking about safety, talking about affordability. They're talking about how the city interacts with the business community. They're talking about transportation, congestion, climate change. All those things matter to my district, just like they matter to the city. But when I think about the biggest challenge, I really do think it's that bringing different voices together in our district. So we're a district where the differences on who lives there can be kind of stark. We have, students eating top ramen in the U district, and we have people who live on Lake Washington. And so I think our district has gotten frustrated with feeling like they don't have a leader that really speaks for them, advocates for them, and is responsive to them. And so they really need somebody who can listen to constituents, incorporate feedback from lots of different perspectives, and come up with the best balanced solution that takes into account a lot of different needs, but is keeping that big picture strategic perspective. What does the district as a whole need?
And what do you think are the biggest challenges facing the city as a whole?
Well, I think we've talked a lot about the biggest challenges. Obviously, we know we have a homelessness crisis. We have an affordability crisis. I think we know about congestion and climate change being really important. And I believe that we really need to make sure we're supporting our schools and graduating healthy students prepared for a 21st century workforce. But when I've lived in the city and the way I've seen City Hall work over the last 5 to 10 years, I think underlying all these challenges is that we're not focused enough on finding solutions that work. So as a city, we don't need narrow ideological perspectives to solve problems. We need big picture strategic thinking, and we need to be able to take action without losing sight of our shared values as a city. And I think we need leaders who know how to make tough choices, can work to build coalitions, are responsive to their constituents, and are willing to move forward. We don't need more studies as a city. We're well educated, but we don't need more data. We actually need to take action quickly on our biggest issues like homelessness, affordability, and climate change. We don't have time to keep thinking about it, so we need the sort of leader who's willing to move forward.
And how can the city help homeless folks?
Well, in running for office and thinking this through, I've done a lot of research like any responsible candidate. And one of the things that is so obvious is that the city has a very scattered approach to this problem. We've got a lot of different city departments that are working on it. We have many different service providers doing important work in the community, but we don't have one sort of coordinated approach and coordinated thoughtfulness to the budget and to these service providers. So we really need one city government body that's responsible for overseeing the entire problem. And we need to look at how we're allocating our resources to make sure they're being used wisely and we're prioritizing exits out of homelessness. So under one city department model, I'd like to see us reorganize the budget and make sure we're providing enough resources for rapid rehousing and diversion programs to keep people out of homelessness in the first place, that we're providing enough temporary and transitional housing with wraparound services, and that we are creating more low barrier housing. We know that it costs more money to serve somebody on the street than it does to put them into a low barrier housing unit. And so we really need to take that big picture approach to make sure that we have one department overseeing all the different providers working in the community, that we're prioritizing exits out of homelessness. We're creating more housing for people with barriers to getting housed themselves. And once we have a system in place, then I think we need to reestablish our expectations for clean and safe public spaces.
Another big issue in this election right now is transportation. What can the city do to help improve our transportation system?
Yeah, I think transportation is huge, and it's big for my district because we will have a lot of light rail presence. And I think it's absolutely imperative that the city gets more people taking different routes around the city. We need more people on public transit. We need more people van pooling. We need more people bike commuting. We need more people working from home. It's important for our traffic congestion. It's also important for climate change. And so I think some of the things we can do is, we cut back a lot of bus lines a couple of years ago, and that made it harder for people. If you put a barrier into using public transportation, people will be less likely to do it. So I think one thing we can do is increase bus lines, increase service hours, especially getting people onto light rail. I also think we need to look at our low-cost ORCA cards. We need to make it easier for people to use those. And right now, our low-cost solution is for somebody making about half of the area median income. But we know from research that anybody making $75,000, if you have a family of 4, you're still struggling in this city. So we need to raise the limit on who can apply for those low-cost ORCA cards so more people are using them. And we also need to provide incentives to businesses in order to get people using alternate methods to get to work.
One of the biggest issues in the minds of most voters right now is affordability. What can the city do to help improve housing affordability?
It's a huge issue, right? And I think anyone who owns a house in the city of Seattle needs to acknowledge how lucky they are. It's a privilege. I'm a homeowner and I feel privileged to be able to own my home, and I'm very lucky. And so we've grown tremendously as a city. And so as a city is booming like ours has over the last years, density is a reality. We need to create more housing. I think we can be really thoughtful about how we increase housing. I think there are a lot of options to increase density in single-family zones without changing height restrictions. So I'd like to see this city make it a lot easier to build an ADU, easier to build a basement apartment, and we can even add duplexes and triplexes without changing height restrictions in single-family zones. But we also need to increase density and create middle housing in areas that are close to job and transit hubs. So we do need to think about density almost community by community and block by block. And so that we're sort of taking a graduated approach. If you're close to transit and jobs, you're going to have higher height limits, and then they sort of go down into the single family zones. But in the heart of a single family neighborhood, we can still increase density with some of those easy solutions that don't change the neighborhood. And I think it's imperative that we do this, because when I think about this as a mom, I think this is a city that my son's generation will not be able to afford to live in. And population density is actually shrinking in many neighborhoods in Seattle as family size shrink. So we have to be creative, and we have to look for ways that we can add housing in concentrated areas with those bigger developments like we've all talked about, but also even into the neighborhoods. I think we can make it easy for people to be a part of the solution.
We live in very polarized times. How would you as a city leader work to bring people together?
I'm glad you're actually asking this question, because I think city council is not known for this right now. And it's one of the things that really motivated me to run. As a business leader over a dozen years, you can't be an effective business leader, at least not the way I lead, if you don't bring people along with you. I think we really do need people that are willing to collaborate, are willing to take in a lot of different perspectives and keep that strategic point of view, what's in the best needs of my district and my city. So at my work, I talk a lot about, the Buddha talks about the third way. You can find a third way. There's often a balanced solution that is not one of the extremes. And I think, as a candidate in a race for city council, sometimes more extreme perspectives, they get a lot of attention. And, it's not quite as sexy to be like, well, I'm for reasonable, thoughtful, balanced solutions that incorporate as many people's input as possible. But I think that really is the sort of leader we need at City Hall. And I think it's really something people are ready for. We don't need any more individual ideological agendas in Seattle. We don't need to be criminalizing some of our biggest employers. We don't need to be thinking about transit from a very narrow point of view of an option that maybe a minority of the city use. We need somebody that's thinking big picture and working for the city as a whole and is willing to collaborate with everybody else on council, with the mayor's office, because we've got some really important and big work to do over the next 5 years. And one of the reasons I'm running is that I really do believe I'm that sort of leader that Seattle needs. And I bring a really unique perspective to this race, because I both have a long and personal history with social justice and advocacy, but I also have the business training and the working experience to be able to actually get things done at City Hall. So I think I'm exactly the sort of leader District 4 needs, and that I will bring that perspective of how to bring our community together for what's best for our city as a whole.
If people want to learn more about your campaign, where should they go?
Well, I would say start with my website, of course, which is electheidistuber.com. And one of the things I'm doing as a part of a grassroots campaign is I'm meeting a lot of people, and I would love to meet people. I'm happy to get a coffee in the morning before work and just tell people more about my background and why I'm running for this office.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jason. It was a lot of fun.
This has been Talk to Seattle, and I've been your host, Jason Rigden. If you want to support this show, why don't you follow us on social media? We're at Talk to Seattle on both Twitter and Instagram. Thank you for listening.